Hi everyone, in this video we will be talking about the Singleton Design Pattern. We will be discussing what it is, how to implement it using JavaScript, and what are the pros and cons of this pattern. So let's get started. The Singleton Design Pattern states that a class can only be instantiated once, and then that instance is shared globally throughout the application. So we basically have a class and we can only create one instance of that class. And then that instance is shared globally and we can access it anywhere in the application. Now let's take a look at an example. So here we have a class config manager. This config manager class has a settings property, which is set to an empty object when we initialize it. And then it has two functions, set and get. The set function takes a key value pair and it stores these key value pairs into the settings object. Then we have a get function that takes the key and based on the key, it retrieves the value from the settings and it returns it. Down here, we're using the class to make two instances. So we have config1 and config2. Now we're calling the set method on both of these objects and we're setting the theme to dark and light. And then right here, we just log by getting the theme on both of the instances. And then we also compare both of these instances. Now over on the right side, you can see the output. So the config1 has a theme dark and the config2 has a theme light. And then when we compare them, the result is false. Why? Because we have made two different instances. So these two instances are different. So on comparing them, we are getting false. Now this right here is violating the Singleton design pattern because the pattern states that the class can only be instantiated once. And over here, we can see that we're making two instances of it. And when we compare them, you can see that we obviously get false because these two are two different instances. Now, how can we make this class satisfy the Singleton design pattern? The way we can do that is by making a global variable instance and by setting it to null initially. Now, whenever we try to create an instance, this constructor function runs. So in this constructor function, we can check that if the instance already exists. So if the instance already exists, we can just return that instance instead of creating a new one. If the instance doesn't exist, then we initialize the settings property to an empty object and we assign the this keyword to the instance. So this right here refers to the instance and we store it here in the variable. And then we simply return the instance that we created. And now if we save it, you can see now the code is this class right here is satisfying the pattern. You can see here that when we create the first instance, we have this config1 object. When we try to instantiate it again, it returns the same instance. So config1 and config2 are basically referring to the same object. These two are the same instance. So right here, when we try to set the theme to dark on config1 and then try to set it to light on config2, we can see that both of these have a theme of light. You can see right here because both of these are the same instance. And then when we try to compare these, you can see these are the same instances. So this code right here satisfies the Singleton design pattern. Now let's talk about the advantages. So it prevents us from making multiple instances, and this makes it ideal for having a shared resource throughout the application. This is useful in situations where you need a single database connection throughout the application, or you need some configuration that can be accessed globally, like the example I showed you where we set the theme to dark or light. It also saves memory because we only create a single instance instead of creating multiple. Now let's talk about the disadvantages. So the first one is hidden dependencies. So since it's a single instance and multiple parts of the application are dependent on the same instance, so if one part of your application changes something within the instance, the other part will be dependent on that instance, and this will make it harder for you to debug the application. The second one is that it makes it difficult for you to unit test. So your tests need to be in a particular order. Why? Because if one test changes something in the instance, the other test will have to be dependent on the change made by the previous test. So you need to be careful while testing your application when using the Singleton design pattern. So that's it for this video. I hope you learned something. I'll see you in the next one.